As the sun dipped below the horizon, Rebecca stood on her porch, her gaze lost in the vibrant colors of the Montana sky. Suddenly, a rustling sound broke her peaceful solitude. A thin German shepherd emerged from the trees, its hungry eyes locking with hers, silently pleading for help. Rebecca hesitated, sensing something deeper in the dog's gaze, a connection. Not just a stray searching for food. She stepped closer, her heart racing as she slowly reached for the leftover chicken on her porch. Little did she know, this simple act of kindness would unravel a life-changing chain of events. Rebecca Mitchell had left behind the fast-paced life of Seattle, seeking solace in the tranquil, isolated hills of rural Montana. At 34, after a demanding career that had drained her emotionally, she took the brave step of leaving city life behind. Her late grandmother's farmhouse became her sanctuary, a place to rebuild, to reconnect with herself, and escape the relentless buzz of urban living. The silence of the mountains was both a comfort and a burden. With no close friends and few neighbors, Rebecca's days were often spent alone, restoring the old farmhouse and adjusting to a slower, quieter life. Though she embraced the solitude, it didn't take long before loneliness crept in. The days felt long, despite the beauty of her surroundings. She found herself yearning for connection, for something or someone to break the stillness. Little did she know, the answer would come in the form of a hungry dog. Rebecca was a woman shaped by her past, a blend of resilience and quiet vulnerability. She was sharp, independent, and used to solving problems on her own. But in this vast, empty landscape, she had never felt so small. Her life in the city had been a whirlwind of deadlines and high-pressure decisions. Yet in the silence of Montana, she found herself reflecting on everything she had left behind. Though she found peace in the solitude, she had yet to find a true sense of belonging. Albert Henderson, on the other hand, was a man of history and hardship, an elderly war veteran. He had once been strong, both physically and emotionally, but the years had worn him down. His beloved service dog, Ranger, had vanished 4 months ago during a violent storm, leaving Albert to face his loneliness and aging body without the companion who had been his anchor for years. He, too, was isolated in his own world, one that had slowly shrunk and faded away. Please let us know where you're watching from and hit the like button if you enjoyed this heartwarming story. One late afternoon, as Rebecca stood on her porch watching the sky turn from fiery orange to deep purple, she noticed movement at the edge of her property. Her heart skipped a beat when a large German shepherd emerged from the trees. The dog was thin, its ribs visible beneath its dull, matted coat. Despite its emaciated condition, the dog carried itself with an undeniable dignity. His amber eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the area as he cautiously approached Rebecca's porch. Instinctively, Rebecca knelt down and softly called to the dog. "Hey there, are you lost?" Her voice was gentle, but the dog hesitated, studying her for a long moment. He didn't growl or bark. Instead, he stood still, his head slightly cocked as if weighing whether or not to trust her. The dog's hunger eventually won over his caution. With one last wary glance at Rebecca, he approached the food she had set out, a leftover piece of chicken and a bowl of water. He devoured the meal in a few quick, desperate bites. Once finished, he paused, looked up at her with those same intelligent eyes, and then turned to disappear into the woods, leaving Rebecca to wonder about the strange encounter. The next morning, Rebecca was jolted awake by a persistent scratching at her door. She lay still for a moment, unsure if it was a dream. But then she heard it again, a soft, insistent sound, slowly. She climbed out of bed and crept downstairs, her mind racing with questions. Through the sidelight window, she saw the familiar shape of the German shepherd standing on her porch. Rebecca's heart skipped a beat as she hurried to the door, still half dazed from sleep. When she opened it, the dog stepped back slightly, his eyes locking with hers once more. This time, He wasn't empty-handed. He held something in his mother-worn leather wallet. Muddy and weathered by the elements, he placed it gently at her feet, as if offering it up, stunned. Rebecca picked it up cautiously. The leather was cracked, and a few soggy dollar bills slipped out as she opened it. Inside, a faded driver's license caught her attention. Albert Henderson. The name of a man she'd never met, but one whose address was just down the road. The dog watched her expectantly, his tail wagging slightly. As if urging her to take action, she hesitated, unsure of what to do next. But one thing was clear: this was no ordinary stray. Click the subscribe button and join our community of like-minded individuals. Your support means the world to us as we bring you more inspiring stories. Rebecca stood frozen for a moment, holding the warm wallet, trying to process the strange turn of events. The dog, Ranger, as it appeared to be named, waited patiently at her feet. His amber eyes watched her with an unsettling calm, as though he knew exactly what was happening, or perhaps even expected it. She glanced down at the wallet again. The faded photo of an elderly man, Albert Henderson, staring back at her. Something in that picture stirred her curiosity. With a deep breath, Rebecca made up her mind. She couldn't ignore this. There was a story here, one that felt important. Even if she didn't yet know what it was, she slipped into her shoes, grabbed the wallet, and, without further hesitation, set off in her car toward the address on the driver's license. The drive to Albert's house took her down winding country roads, far from the main highway. The land surrounding her was vast and untamed, the fields rolling out in every direction. The quiet of the area seemed to deepen with every mile she traveled, making Rebecca feel as though she were venturing further into the past, away from the life she had left behind in the city. Finally, after a 15-minute drive, she reached the property. The house was small but weathered, clearly a place that had seen better days. The barn in the distance seemed to be falling apart, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. The air felt heavy with the weight of time, and for a moment, Rebecca wondered if she had made a mistake coming here. But then she saw him, a man, leaning heavily on a cane, standing on the porch. Watching her approach, as Rebecca pulled up to the porch, the elderly man's eyes flickered with surprise and curiosity. His appearance was weathered, his features softened by age and hardship. But there was still a spark of something strong in his gaze. He wore a worn coat and leaned heavily on a cane, his face lined with years of struggle. As she got out of the car, the man spoke first, his voice raspy but warm. "Well, I'll be. Who might you be?" "Miss." Rebecca hesitated for a moment, holding the wallet in her hand. She stepped forward slowly. "I found this morning. It belongs to someone named Albert Henderson." She paused, watching his reaction. "I believe it's yours." The man's face registered a moment of shock, followed by something softer, almost like recognition. "Ranger," he murmured under his breath. He reached out, as if to steady himself, and Rebecca handed him the wallet. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned it over, then looked up at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "That's my old friend," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Ranger. He's been gone for months. I thought I'd lost him for good." Albert invited Rebecca to sit with him on the porch. As they talked, he explained how Ranger had been more than just a dog. To him, he had been his service dog, his companion, and his lifeline after his time in Vietnam. Albert had lost his leg to a landmine in the war, and Ranger had been by his side ever since. "Ranger helped me with everything: walking, carrying things, even keeping me steady on my prosthetic," Albert said, his eyes brimming with quiet pride. "I couldn't do anything without him." As Albert spoke, Rebecca's understanding of the situation began to deepen. Yet so many questions remained unanswered. The bond between the old man and the dog was undeniable. And the story behind Ranger's disappearance started to unravel in unexpected ways. Albert continued, his voice steady but tinged with regret. It wasn't just the storm that made him run, you see. After the accident, life got harder. My health was already failing, and I didn't have the energy to keep up with everything. My daughter, Marie, she's been pushing me for months to sell this place. Move to a retirement home. She's afraid I can't take care of myself anymore. But I'm not ready to leave. This farm my home, it's all I have left. Rebecca sat quietly, listening as Albert spoke of his struggles. He mentioned how the stress of his daughter's constant demands, combined with mounting medical bills and a town that seemed indifferent to his needs, had pushed him to the brink. I don't want to give up, Albert admitted, his voice breaking. Ranger was the only thing that kept me going. But then, one night, the storm had come. It wasn't just any storm, it was violent, with howling winds and lightning that split the sky. Albert had been out in the yard, trying to fix a broken fence, when a bolt of lightning struck a tree near the property line. Sending part of the fence crashing down, Ranger had been by his side, as always, but something in that moment broke. Albert suspected that the storm, combined with the sudden changes round the property, new fences, uprooted trees, and a now altered landscape, disoriented the dog. He ran that night. Albert said softly, I don't know if he was scared or if he couldn't find his way back with everything looking so different. He just disappeared. I searched for him everywhere, but there was nothing, no trace, and I had to face the truth that I might never see him again. Rebecca could hear the deep sorrow in his voice, the unspoken pain of losing not only his dog, but a part of himself. Albert's voice faltered as he admitted, when Ranger left, it was like I lost everything, my independence, my strength, even my will to keep going. Rebecca's heart ached. She had been so focused on her own loneliness. But Albert's story made her realize that his isolation had run deeper than she could ever imagine. Rebecca's mind raced as she absorbed Albert's words. His pain was raw, and the weight of his loneliness seemed to press down on the porch like the heavy Montana air. She looked at him, this proud, weathered man who had served his country and now found himself forgotten by both society and his own family, and felt a pang of empathy. But more than that, she felt a sense of responsibility. The dog had come to her. It wasn't a coincidence. She believed something had brought Ranger back, and now something was urging her to help. But how, and at what cost? Albert's story stirred a turmoil in Rebecca. Her life, too, had been filled with transitions and loss. She had abandoned her city life, her career, everything familiar, to start anew in this quiet corner of Montana. And now she was facing a choice: to help Albert rebuild his life, or to keep walking the same solitary path she had always known. She wasn't sure she was ready to take on the burden of someone else's pain. But the look in Albert's eyes, and the quiet loyalty of Ranger sitting patiently beside him, made it impossible to walk away. Albert, she began, her voice uncertain but steady. You shouldn't be alone. I can help. Albert raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. I know what you're thinking, and I appreciate it. But I've made my choices. My daughter wants me to sell the land and move to a place where they can keep an eye on me. But I can't. I won't. Rebecca could feel the strength of his words, the stubbornness that had kept him going all these years. I get that, she replied softly. But Albert, your daughter, she's just worried about you. It's not about abandoning your home. It's about finding a way to survive. Albert sighed deeply, his gaze distant. Surviving isn't living, and I'll die a lot faster if I give up on what matters. Rebecca bit her lip, the weight of his words sinking in. She understood his need for independence. She had felt it herself when she'd moved here, hoping to escape the pressure of her old life. But Albert wasn't just struggling with old age and war wounds, he was fighting to preserve his dignity. And that was something Rebecca could respect. "I know," she said finally. "But that doesn't mean you have to fight alone. This character truly deserves your like. But sadly, they haven't received the recognition they deserve yet." The weeks after their first meeting seemed to pass in a blur for Rebecca. She continued to visit Albert regularly, checking on his health and helping round the property when she could. Ranger, now back at Albert's side, seemed to regain some of his strength and energy, though it was clear the dog wasn't as spry as he had once been. The bond between the two was unmistakable, and it was easy to see how much Albert relied on his loyal companion, not just for physical support, but for emotional stability. One chilly afternoon, as Rebecca was working on her grandmother's farmhouse, she received a frantic phone call from Albert. His voice, usually calm and steady, was shaky, and there was an edge of panic she'd never heard before. "Rebecca," he gasped, "I need help. I've fallen." Rebecca's heart raced. "Where are you? What happened?" she asked, grabbing her keys and heading toward his house immediately. Albert's voice was strained. "I'm in the yard, near the barn. My prosthetic leg gave way. I couldn't catch myself." He paused, his breathing shallow. "I think I'm hurt. I don't know if I can get up." The worry in Albert's voice had Rebecca speeding down the winding roads toward his property, her mind racing as she arrived. She saw Ranger standing near the edge of the yard, looking up the hill toward the barn where Albert had fallen. The dog's ears were flattened against his head, his gaze fixed on the distant barn with a sense of unease. Rebecca's heart clenched as she ran to the spot, finding Albert lying on the ground. His body contorted awkwardly as he struggled to get up. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she helped him sit up. His face was pale, and his breathing labored. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice weak. "I should have been more careful." "I don't want to be a burden." Rebecca shook her head, her eyes brimming with concern. "You're not a burden, Albert. Let me help you." As she carefully helped him back to the porch, she noticed just how fragile he had become. It wasn't just his body, it was his spirit. Albert had always been so independent, so proud, and to see him in this state was a stark reminder of how much he had lost. But it also ignited something inside Rebecca. She couldn't let him face this alone, not now. Not after everything he had been through. "I'm going to stay with you," Rebecca said firmly, her resolve strengthening. "You don't have to fight this by yourself." Over the following days, Albert's condition didn't improve as quickly as Rebecca had hoped. His health seemed to deteriorate steadily, and the once strong veteran now struggled with even the simplest tasks. The once proud man who had handled every hardship on his own was now dependent on Rebecca for support, and it weighed heavily on him. But it was his pride, the same stubborn pride that had kept him going through years of hardship, that would become the greatest challenge to Rebecca's mission of helping him. Each time she tried to persuade him to accept more care, whether from doctors or his daughter, Albert pushed back. He was determined not to be a burden, and the thought of losing his independence gnawed at him constantly. Rebecca knew something had to change. She couldn't let Albert's pride get in the way of his well-being, especially when she had seen how much he needed help. As she spent more time with him, she realized that the real challenge wasn't just his physical condition, it was the isolation he felt from his family and community, and the battle he fought within himself to hold on to a life that had long since passed its prime. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Albert sighed deeply. "I can't do this anymore, Rebecca. I'm not the man I used to be. My daughter was right all along. I should have sold the land and moved." Rebecca shook her head, her voice firm. "No, Albert, you don't have to give up. Your daughter is worried. But she doesn't understand what this place means to you. You've given everything to this land, to your family, and to Ranger. That's worth something. You deserve to have your place in this world, even if it means accepting help. Albert looked at her, his eyes weary. What can I do? I've lost everything. The farm is falling apart, and I'm falling apart with it. Rebecca's eyes softened. She placed a hand on his arm. We can't change the past, but we can do something about the present. And you don't have to do it alone anymore. Let me help you. Together, we can find a way to keep your home, to make sure you get the care you need, and to make sure Ranger stays by your side. Albert sat silently for a moment, his fingers nervously tracing the edge of his cane. Then, slowly, he nodded. Maybe I've been too stubborn, he muttered. I've spent too much time fighting the wrong battle. Rebecca smiled gently, relieved. We all get stuck sometimes, but it's never too late to make a change. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with friends and family. We truly appreciate your support and look forward to bringing more heartfelt content to you. Rebecca's efforts to bring Albert the help he needed grew more urgent with each passing day. She couldn't stand by and watch the injustice of it all, how the wealthy landowners in the area had profited off Albert's vulnerability while he struggled in silence. With the help of local veterans organizations, Rebecca began gathering evidence of the corruption and mismanagement in the town. She reached out to a few trusted allies, including a lawyer who had taken an interest in Albert's case after hearing his story. What followed was a slow, painstaking battle against the powerful forces in the town. But Rebecca was relentless. She filed complaints, gathered support from the few allies Albert still had, and made sure the press took an interest in his case. Word began to spread about the injustice done to veterans, and soon public outcry was so strong that the corrupt officials had no choice but to act. In a pivotal moment, a town meeting was held, and the corrupt officials were forced to answer for their actions. Albert's land was returned to him, along with the compensation he was owed for the years of neglect and exploitation. The powerful men who had once controlled the town were finally exposed, and their reign of greed came to an end. Albert, his dignity restored, sat back in his chair, a rare smile breaking through the years of sorrow. Thank you, Rebecca, he whispered. With the victory came a quiet peace, and a new chapter for both Rebecca and Albert. The land was returned to Albert, and with the legal battles behind them, he finally began to heal both physically and emotionally, the once sworn veteran. Now, given the justice he had been denied for so long, looked at life through a new lens. The struggle had been long, but there was a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. Ranger, who had been his constant companion, now stood proudly by his side, as if sensing that things had finally come full circle. For Rebecca, the experience had been transformative. She had come to Montana looking for solitude, to escape the noise and chaos of her past life, but in fighting for Albert, she had found a deeper purpose. She wasn't just a witness to his struggle, she was a part of something bigger. Helping Albert had connected her to a community she never expected, and through this process, she discovered that her loneliness had been replaced by something far more meaningful. Belonging. As she sat on the porch one evening, watching Albert and Ranger walking together, Rebecca realized that she was no longer an outsider. She had become part of a story, a legacy of justice and friendship, and that, in itself, was a victory. As Albert began to regain his strength and confidence, something unexpected began to shift. His daughter, Marie, who had been absent for months, arrived one afternoon. Her car pulling slowly into the long driveway, Rebecca noticed her hesitation as she stepped out of the vehicle, her eyes scanning the land as if seeing it all for the first time. Albert stood on the porch, watching his daughter approach. There was no anger in his expression, only a quiet curiosity. Marie had always been the voice of reason. Her persistent push for Albert to sell the farm, move to assisted living, had always caused tension. Yet, now, there was something different in the air. She had come back, not with the force of someone trying to take control, but with the tentative steps of someone unsure of how to heal old wounds. "Dad." Marie's voice broke the silence, her eyes softening as she looked at him. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I can see now how much this means to you." Albert studied her for a moment, his eyes searching her face. "I've missed you, Marie. But this land, it's part of me. I can't just give it up. I never could." Tears welled up in Marie's eyes, and without a word, she walked toward him, her arms opening wide. Albert didn't hesitate. He embraced her, his frailty not a barrier, but a reminder of the years they had lost. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Albert smiled. "The first true smile in months, I know." "Sweetheart, I know." As Marie and Albert shared their emotional reunion, Rebecca stood quietly off to the side, giving them space, but also feeling an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. She had come to Montana to escape the noise of her old life, to find peace and solitude. But what she found was something far deeper in helping Albert. She had unknowingly bridged gaps between family, community, and even herself. Rebecca had never expected to become such an integral part of Albert's life, let alone his family's. But as she watched Albert and Marie embrace, she realized that her role had never been just about helping with legal battles or managing day-to-day chores. It was about healing, about restoring connection, something she had desperately needed herself. Helping Albert wasn't just about righting wrongs. It was about teaching her how to rebuild, to forgive, and to become part of something larger than herself. Marie turned to Rebecca, her eyes still glistening with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you for all you've done, for bringing us back together." Rebecca smiled softly, a little awkwardly, as the full weight of her involvement began to sink in. "You don't need to thank me. You two had to find your way back to each other on your own. I just wanted to help." But deep down, Rebecca knew that by helping Albert, she had not only brought his family back together, she had found her own place in the world, and that, she realized, was something she never thought she'd find here. With the storm of conflict behind them, Rebecca, Albert, and Marie slowly began to rebuild not just the land, but their lives. Piece by piece, Albert's health continued to improve, and with the support of his daughter and Rebecca, he started to restore the farm to its former glory. The property, once weighed down by neglect and years of struggle, now buzzed with new life. Together, they repaired the barn, cleared the overgrown fields, and revitalized the space that had been Albert's anchor for so many years. Rebecca threw herself into helping them, but this time, it wasn't out of obligation or a sense of duty, it was out of belonging. The once quiet farmhouse had transformed into a home filled with laughter, work, and shared purpose. Each brick that was laid in the repair of the old barn was a testament to what they had all been through, and every project completed was a reminder of what could be built when people worked together. Albert, though still frail, had found new strength in the support of his daughter and Rebecca. The bond between father and daughter, once strained, was now rebuilding in the simplest ways, sharing stories, working side by side, and, at times, simply enjoying the quiet moments. For Rebecca, the transformation was equally profound. What had begun as an isolated escape had become a place where relationships were nurtured, where her loneliness had been replaced by a sense of purpose and family. She had found something unexpected, a home, not in the walls of the farmhouse, but in the hearts of those she had helped dot as the months passed. Rebecca realized she had become more than just a visitor in this community. She had become an integral part of it. The work on the farm had continued, and each day, Rebecca grew closer to Albert, Marie, and the land that had once seemed like a distant, daunting escape. It was no longer just a place for solitude. It had transformed into a home filled with connection, hard work, and, most of all, belonging. Rebecca had never expected to stay in Montana. She had come to escape, to find peace. But in helping Albert rebuild his life, she had found a new purpose. It wasn't just about restoring an old farmhouse. It was about restoring relationships, about giving people and herself a chance to heal. Albert and Marie's relationship had healed as well. Their bond, once fractured by misunderstandings and neglect, had grown stronger with each shared day. Rebecca, who had once feared being alone forever, had become a constant in their lives, a friend, a sister of sorts. It was a role she had never expected, but one she embraced wholeheartedly. One evening, as Rebecca watched Albert and Ranger walk through the fields, the sun casting long shadows on the land they had rebuilt together, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. She wasn't just living in the moment. She was building a future, one filled with connections, community, and love, things she had once thought were out of her reach. And as she stood there, she realized that the path she had stumbled upon had led her home. Please share this video with your friends and family and comment below to let us know how this story touched you. Would you like to hear the second part? Let us know.